Hey folks, Dave here. Today we're going to talk about how to make pho. We're going to start off with blanching some bones. And you're going to want to blanch your bones, your other cuts of meat, brisket, flank. So the reason we blanch the meats and the bones is to get rid of that initial scum. You're still going to get some later in your main pot, but it will be a lot easier to scoop out if you do this first. And it also protects the clarity of the broth. We're going to blanch the bones for about 5 to 10 minutes. You're going to want to do the same for your other cuts of beef as well. Once they're done blanching, set those aside. Now that your bones are done blanching, we're going to put that into our Instapot. And if you don't have an Instapot, you can just put that in your main pot. So the reason I use the Instapot for the bones is to speed up that next day flavor. This really breaks down the collagen in the bones and the joints very rapidly. A lot of times you'll hear people talking about that next day flavor of pho. This speeds it up within a couple of hours. And the reason for that is that it breaks down the collagen in the joints and the bones a lot quicker. So the thickness of that broth is gonna really come out. How you know you have really good broth is if you refrigerate it and there's a gelatinous texture to it. You'll know that it's a very rich broth. So next up, we're going to cut our ginger. I like to toast mine or char it. This is optional. It gives your broth a darker color. Some people say also a bolder flavor. Again, this is optional. You can easily get away with just cutting the ginger in half or skinning the ginger and placing it in your main pot. And I'm going to char the onion as well. So now we'll add the onion and the ginger to the main broth. And with your main pot, fill it up with water 1/3 of the way. And the brisket that you blanched or whatever other cut that you have, you can put it in right now as well. I'm going to add salt. You can add raw sugar at this point as well. The reason I use raw sugar, it's a lot easier to measure. Traditionally, people add rock sugar, or some add granulated sugar, but as I understand, that spoils your broth a lot quicker if you were to refrigerate it. Next up, while that's simmering, we are going to cook our beef ribs. This is a bit of a gimmick, but I really enjoy cooking this and eating it with my pho. This is by no means traditional, but I think as an option, you might enjoy it. We're gonna season this with some sea salt, black pepper, garlic powder, cinnamon, and clove powder. Clove powder is optional, but I really like the sweet aroma that it gives off. Alternatively, you can also use coarse salt or kosher salt, or regular salt, if that's all you have. So once you're done seasoning, we're gonna pop it in the oven for about 250 for 3 or 4 hours. You could probably get away with 300 degrees. That'll take probably 2 to 3 hours. But I like to do low and slows, so I make sure that the meat falls right off the bone. You wanna be struggling with it as you're eating soup. Next, we're gonna cut our garnishes while everything's simmering. I like to use white onion or yellow onion, cilantro, and some green onion. Some other options for garnish would be Thai basil and some cilantro. So after a couple of hours, your bone broth in the Instant Pot should be ready. We're going to remove all the bones. I like to keep the marrow and some of the other joint meat off to the side to eat later. It's real tender and very delicious with your soup later on. Once you have all the bones removed, you're going to pour that bone stock into your main pot. Again, if you don't have an Instapot, you can add your bones to your main pot, but it will just take longer to cook for that next day flavor. It'll take about 6 hours to render, and definitely overnight if you want that next day flavor. You're going to want to let this simmer uncovered. If you cover it, little droplets will fall from the lid into the soup, and that causes a cloudy broth. So after your brisket or other cuts of meat have been simmering in the pot for about 2 to 3 hours, we're going to want to remove that. And I'm going to stick my brisket into the freezer so that it gets cold enough to be dense enough for me to slice. And I'm going to add more water to the broth. Next, we're gonna add our herb packets. You can usually find these packets at an Asian grocery store, but if you can't find these packets, all you need to buy is some cinnamon sticks, star anise, and some clove. So I'm adding some of these other ingredients. It's a little redundant, but I just wanted to show you guys what other methods you can use. So if you don't have those herb tea packets, you can add cinnamon, star anise, and the cloves direct. If you are able to find empty tea bags and the pre-mixed powders, you can put that powder into the tea bag. So we're gonna add some more sugar and salt to taste. You want your broth a little more saltier and a little bit sweeter, because when you add it to the noodles will dilute that flavor and broth. So we just want that flavor to be a little bit stronger. And I add a tea bag throughout the cook, just so that the herbs are consistent throughout the cook. And here's some of the ingredients on the back of that powder that we've covered down on. And you only want to leave it in there for about an hour. If you're using a bag like that, you don't want it to spill out. It'll make your broth really gritty and cloudy, and the taste will be different. Next, we're gonna cut our eye round. Now, I put my eye round in the freezer for about an hour or two so that it's almost frozen. You just need it dense enough so that it's easier to slice. And you want real thin slices so that when you pour the broth over it, it'll cook in the bowl. So that when you pour the broth over it, it'll cook in the bowl. Some people just put it off to the side and they dunk the eye round as they're eating so that they have more of a medium rare. With the brisket, you don't have to freeze. You just want it cold enough so that, again, the density of it makes it a lot easier to slice. And here we have some fresh noodles. Again, you can find this at your local Asian grocery store usually. If not, you might be able to find some dry noodles. And if you can't find it there, Amazon, I believe, sells the dry noodles. If you do use the dry noodles, you're gonna wanna soak those noodles in a bowl of water for at least an hour. With the fresh noodles, again, you should soak those in water as well, but I've used it without any soaking. You just have to blanch the noodles a little longer in the boiling water. So in a separate pot, we're gonna boil some water for the blanching of the noodles. Just add a little bit of salt in there. Once you bring it to a boil with a strainer or coriander, I believe it's called, you're gonna wanna blanch the noodles about 10 to 15 seconds, depending on how dense you want it. And then you wanna make sure you can strain all that water. So once you've strained the noodles, put that in a bowl, add your garnishes, your white onions, cilantro, green onions. Here I have pictured some Thai basil. Usually you pick off the leaves from the stem, and I have some cilantro as well. In your rack of beef ribs, just slice one rib and add it to your bowl. Then fill your bowl up with broth, and you're good to go. Something else I wanted to show you guys was the bone, how bone dry it is, how much the Instapot speeded up the process. Most of the collagen from the bones and the joints extracted. Well, I hope you guys learned something today. Hope you enjoy cooking pho, and I'll see you guys around.